Hello everyone, and today we are going to take a look at Lost Odyssey, so let's get straight into it. So, this is from the brainchild of the original creator of Final Fantasy and the composer of a large chunk of Final Fantasy. And when he went to found the original creator, not the composer went freelance. But the original creator of Final Fantasy unleashed from Square Enix after the module that found Mistwalker. So we got a lot of different things to talk about, both about the game and some of the development things that are interesting little notes. So let's start here. So the story: you play as Kaim, who has no recollection of his past, but he is aware that he's basically immortal and he just lives the life of war, and you don't really know anything about him. He gets sent on a mission to go check the Grand Staff project, and it leads to a rabbit hole that leads to his past, developments of plot, and a madman seeking world domination. This is a very interesting history about Lost Odyssey. While I'm probably not going to be the most negative or the most positive when it comes to talking about everything with the game, it certainly has a very interesting team of people. The original creator of Final Fantasy, the composer of the pretty much the Final Fantasy franchise as a whole, at least many of the titles everyone cherishes and loves, has a famous Japanese, at the time, best-selling novelist who was part of it. He wrote the Thousand Year Dreams, which we'll get to that. And interestingly enough, I found several things I myself didn't actually know until doing a little extra research to talk about a few things. But we got a lot of different things. So let's focus on the game at the moment, shall we? So the main premise of the game is it's a JRPG, and it focuses on Immortals. You have 4 Immortals you get through the story, and 5 Mortals you get through the story to experience for the most part, a traditional JRPG kind of experience with a few twists and ideas from a few Final Fantasy games that you may be familiar with. So let's get in there. So combat is a turn-based affair. It is not active time like Final Fantasy IV and many titles of the Final Fantasy franchise would go forward with that. It is strictly turn-based, turn by turn, nothing rushing you to choose your turns, so you get the time to think. Now, the nice thing about the game is you can really set up your Immortals in pretty interesting designs. The only real limit you get to your 4 Immortals is 2 of them are mages and 2 of them are melee. And while they can actually learn everything in the game, abilities that are going to be only 100% useful in that kind of class basically are going to only be for those characters of that class of a mage or the melee type characters. Outside of that, there's a lot of different designs you can do with them. Now you might ask, why do they get to learn everything? So the Immortals have a system where they can learn skills from the Mortals, who level up and learn skills in a more traditional sense of JRPG style. Level, get new abilities. The Immortals then can link those abilities and learn them in a style similar to Final Fantasy IX, where they get a point system until they permanently learn it, and then you can link something else. While on that note, there are also item accessories that they can put on that also teach moves. And these accessories also have a dual use, because not only can they teach Immortals abilities that they can permanently learn and then equip through those slots that they can gain throughout the story, but on top of that, you can also still equip it and get that effect. If a mortal or an immortal is equipped with the accessory, they gain that ability. So, on top of any of the slots that immortals have, so let's say Kaim has 5 slots currently, I filled them all up, and then I equipped him with a immune poison accessory. Boom, he gets that still. And same with mortals. It's a way to teach mortals something temporarily. Mortals cannot learn from accessories, but while using them, they can gain those abilities. So it lets you gain a little, just a tad bit of extra customization with your mortals, but just a little. But you have full reign to basically do whatever with the 4 immortals. Now, as the game goes on, party members join, leave, and story events happen. So it has a very Final Fantasy kind of setting to that, where characters come and go. But in the end, you'll have all your characters for the end game, though. But story events will cause things. Now, you have skills and magic. Magic obviously consumes mana, and skills is kind of not necessarily always that. Some skills don't consume mana, while others do, so that kind of varies a little bit. Mainly skills that usually are just a little more beneficial, or usually freebie skills, while others that do damage and that usually cost mana. That kind of varies a little bit, but the most skills do cost some kind of mana, but overall it's pretty basic, nothing too crazy. You don't have like an insane SP bar thing of that. But there is something interesting with a bar, though. This game does a front row back system, and it has a defensive bar that represents your front row's total HP, and that used in calculations. Let's put it this way. Okay. This ball represents everyone's HP in the front row. And instead of attacking the front row, the enemy attacks the back row. Using that as a calculation, it will heighten the defense of the back row. But if the front row is attacked, it lowers that ball, making it where they can get damage into the back row more. So this creates a system where you usually need to blow up the front row of enemies so you can get the ones in the back easier. But there was few strategies to get around the fools, so you know. But it's an interesting mechanic to help protect mages, fragile characters, or when you're in weird situations. It has an upside. Now, it is a little harder to get that defense bar back up. There are abilities that do it, but usually it's a little tricky to get refilled mid-combat once it gets lowered a lot. Outside that, outside combat, you have towns, you have stores and that to buy equipment. And the wings that you get that can change weapon elements, add different stats, effects, and things to your physical attack, add a additional system of a timing system. It'll make a wing, and you want to match up a wing that's enclosing over the wing with your trigger button. And that basically, if you do it right, it signifies the triggering of the effect of the wing. So like if it drains MP or poisons them, does more damage, it gives a greater chance of success of that. The wing system isn't a necessary thing you have to really do. It doesn't feel pressure that, oh, I have to do this, or I'm just going to do no damage. And then skills in that don't get the wing system. They are just solely for a character's melee basic attack command, which is a little weird considering a few skills in that I think could have made use of the skill system, but they don't. Now, you can change wings in combat, so if you need a certain element or something, you can swap between. It makes, and you can do it with your accessories too. Your weapon, your accessories, and your wings. So you could pretty much swap everything with your party member mid-combat. So you can always find a use for. Your weapons tend to just mainly always be upgraded. There's not really much point to needing a older version of a weapon. But your wings and your accessories will basically always be useful from beginning to the end. So that stuff, kind of like how Final Fantasy IX had a lot of it for teaching, and like I said, you get different effects from wings and different abilities you can learn from accessories, and even if a mortal hasn't learned, you can still equip the accessory and not have to waste a mortal's skill slot or you can give it to mortals. So there's a lot of item hoarding. You'll still have, you'll keep a lot of stuff in this game for exchanging and such. But when it comes outside combat and that, you'll have several towns, interact with people, there'll some side quests and things, and you can also find the 1,000-Year Door stories. Now, the 1,000-Year stories are basically visual novels, pure text visual novels, and they will win by the he was the best-selling author in Japan at the time. I don't know if he still holds that title now, but... And I gotta say, between him and the Final Fantasy composer, if you can feel emotion, like the music sets up the emotional feel, and the words set up all the sorrow, sadness, and that, they will beautiful stories if you can get into reading them. They're not voice acted, so if you can't read them, or don't want to sit there to read them and that, you're going to miss out on a portion of the story. They are very sad, they're very moody, and they kind of deal with basically the immortal characters' years of living 1,000 years. They're scattered throughout the game. You have to find them, usually interact with a character, and it triggers a memory. Most of them are chimes, but there are a few for the other immortal characters too later in the game. They're very heart-wrenching. And it's interesting to note that the idea was to kind of convey the emotion of what would it be like actually being immortal, not being able to die at all. It's an interesting message. It is, but I gotta say, it's not shared in the gameplay itself. Well, there is one thing shared in the gameplay when it comes to the Immortals, actually. An extra thing when it comes to combat is that, you know, that kind of joke with the following has been censored, because I am not spoiling this, but it is pretty obvious what game I'm talking about. If you know what I'm talking about, on PS1 will spoil this character died. And you're like, why can't I use a phoenix down? He stabbed blank through the freaking blank, and now they're dead. Throw a phoenix down. You know, that kind of disconnect from the story world to the gameplay. Something that's kind of actually nice with the Immortals is if the Immortal dies in combat, and, you know, you still have someone alive and combat's still going, they'll actually come back to life with a portion of their life restored. That's kind of an interesting little connection with the Immortals with combat. I actually like that. But going on back to the 1,000 stories, though, it just really reflects how the characters' lives are full of pain and stuff through living so long and that. But the game story follows a plot of a madman who basically wants to rule the world, and he is like Jafar as fuck. Like, it's like knockoff Kefka Jafar merged together to make this incredibly obvious villain. Now, there is some more stuff about the villain we'll go about in spoilers, but I mean, that's really what the game story focuses on. And it's kind of a weird disconnect between the 1,000 stories, the 1,000-year stories, and the actual game's plot. It feels a little, just a wee bit disconnected. Because, I mean, the story's all really nice, heart-wrenching. I actually remember reading one of them when I first got the game back when I played it, and it actually made me cry. They're really fucking sad shit, man. They really, really did a good job writing and putting the music in there to help set the mood in that. But it is a strange disconnect from the story, which we'll get more on that on the story. Now, the world, there's a weird, like, mix mash of things when it comes to, like, the world. So, like, it has a Final Fantasy X kind of system where you have the world map and you just kind of pick a location. But at the same time, you'll eventually get vessels and explore the world like in a more traditional sense, but by Wattle, which you can find additional locations. Many of them are like in-game super boss equipment and secrets and such. And it's kind of odd to spend like half the game, just selecting destinations and going those places and doing stuff, and then you get to explore the world on a boat. Not that it's unwelcomed. It's a very nice feel to explore a world map again, because let's be honest, a lot of modern JRPGs don't do that very often, except for ones that are very, very intentionally trying to be very retro. Or they'll, like, remakes or that of older titles, and then, they kind of obviously do that. But, with a newer title. So it's kind of a nice mix again to explore the world again, but then not being too overly complex. It does follow a very Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy XIII kind of thing, where a lot of the areas you explore are linear hallways with side paths to find treasure in that. They do have puzzles. There are a number of puzzles. It's certainly not Final Fantasy XIII where there's just almost fucking nothing. You're just running through a hallway. There are puzzles and dungeons and things to go through in Lost Odyssey to do. Some lead to extra items, some are for progress and stuff. So, it's a nice little thing still. So it's not dead brain as Final Fantasy XIII was. I would compare it probably more to like Final Fantasy X in its last design. Because you gotta keep in mind, 10, 11, 12 were the last Final Fantasies on PS2 before going into next gen, which the 13 trilogy would be the next 3 Final Fantasies on the 360 and PS3. So, I would imagine 10 and 9 had a lot of inspirations for Lost Odyssey being, the more later traditional titles. Especially when 9 is commonly, if I remember correctly, many of the Final Fantasy staff members themselves say 9 is a lot of their favorites, so that probably isn't too surprising to me in that category. Now, what should we say here? I should probably say that the game's story, to me, felt like the weakest link when it came to this game. Because combat and everything's pretty traditional with a few twists in that. It gives you lots of customization in that. But the disconnect between the 1,000-year story memories and the story just feels very conflicting with each other. Because the 1,000-year story feels like it's trying to tell you that living, for so long is painful and stuff, and then you're just chasing this madman who's just fucking Jafar and Japanese crack cocaine. I think that's one of my biggest conflictions when it comes to this game. But another thing I would criticize is how some of the story is directed. It uses a lot of these weird side panel cut-ins at times, and has a lot of needless blurring, and I'm not really sure if it was maybe the director's fault directly, but the way the story's told through cutscenes is sometimes kind of really bizarre and needlessly, it's pretty sloppy. I didn't really like it. Maybe it might be someone else's thing, but the presentation, how some cutscenes work, is just really off to me. Now, when it comes to voice acting, the characters and such, voice acting does its job. Wouldn't necessarily say it's the best. Some characters are better than others. I think Kaim's character is, designed the best, voiced the best, and all that. He has a very clear design that stands out much better. Now, being an older game, some of the characters' hair models, for example, don't look as nice as one of the multiple characters' hair. It's interesting to note also with the artwork, by the way. If you look at the official artwork, the drawing artwork, not the 3D model artwork, something I learned is a very famous manga artist. I think it was called Vanguard or something like that. And I'm not personally familiar with it, but upon looking up his artwork, it is like dead fucking, like, you can, like, there's a guy who literally just fucking has that kind of look that Kaim has. You can see his style in both of them. I'll try to remember to throw a image in the video if you want to look that up, or leave a comment down below with the title. But it's a very nice art style, which sadly isn't really used in the game all too much. You see pretty much all the 3D models. The only place you really see the artwork is really in the manual and on the status screen, the menus, that you don't really see a lot of 2D nice drawn artwork in the game itself, which is a shame because it's very nice, and there isn't a lot of it. This is basically a picture of every character, and that's about it. It's a real shame. I feel like they could have actually used a lot more of that artwork in this game. Honestly, it really could been nice. Now, being a 360 game, obviously it looks, how should we say, a little dated compared to modern times. So we have to think within the time period the game came out. Honestly, being an early 360 title, I don't think it looks too bad, honestly. It's 3D, it's very nice models. I would just say the biggest things I think that stand out are mostly some characters' hair. Like, the time period of PS2 and early PS3 and 360, some hairstyle just doesn't look right. Like, they just look like flat textures. Now, it depends on which characters we're talking. Like, Kaim's hair is all mainly down, so it's not very noticeable with Kaim. But, like, two of the characters have a lot of their hair that stick partially upward, and you can see, like, how flat it looks. But outside that, like, the armor, the weapons and stuff, which is actually nice. The weapons actually change when you equip different ones and things, so it's pretty nice. They also even wear the accessories. Many of them are hard to notice, but like stuff like there's some glasses and that, they'll actually wear those glasses. They're very small, minor changes, but they're actually very appreciated, honestly. But the models, the armor doesn't change. Like, there's no armor system. You just have wings, accessories, and the weapons. So everyone stays dressed the same, but the way they're designed everything is pretty good. It has kind of a, how should I say, a more realistic Asian kind of look going for it for a number of the characters and that. It's not so anime, if that makes sense. It's a lot more mixed with a little touch of more realism look in there, kind of like how Xenoblade Chronicles 1 was a little mixture of anime and realism, and not going full anime like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 went. Which, nothing wrong with anime, it's just saying, you know, I like a little variety too, so. And we don't get a lot of the mixed anime realistic kind of style very often. It's especially nowadays, it's just a very dying breed. So I just appreciate when we get them once in a while. But I have to say, I don't want to be openly negative about the game, but it's just, how to put this nicely. It's a 4-disc game, but it oddly feels really short. It took me over 50 hours to finish the game, so it certainly wasn't short, but it was weird playing through the game, because there's only a few things that happen on, like, Disc 1 and Disc 2 specifically before changing into the next disc. The majority of more interesting stuff happens on 3 and 4, but it's just kind of odd how the game was split into 4 discs. And admittedly, the 360 was on DVDs, which there was probably not as many compression. I mean, that's usually the big problem with DVDs. You had to either be really good at compressing things without destroying the quality of the stuff. And that's probably was main problem because it was an early 360 title. But I just feel like going from disc to disc was really short. It felt really odd, the progression through the game. It's hard to really describe. Slightly rushed, maybe, kind of feel. But last thing I would want to really touch up with about the the game, before we get into like spoilers and stuff, is the music. The music to me was my favorite thing. Very good job of doing even just the generic battle music songs and that are really good. I really like, even before I did a full playthrough of this game, I still remembered the original battle theme because it was catchy. And there's a lot of variety music, you know, like how Final Fantasy X had like a walk track. There's a walk track in this. You know, he spiced it up a little bit, but he really wanted to keep with a mood of sorrow and being immortal, what that entails. He used that as a mood for the general game, and it really works for the gameplay, the story, both in the 1,000-Year stories and the actual gameplay story. I think the music was basically the best thing that came out of this game. And it's a bit of a shame because it wasn't enough to save the game. Because obviously there's never been a Lost Odyssey 2 or anything. But if I was to go down and say what I would really think about the game. Now, probably one of the main things that I wish I kind of knew is what it's like playing Shadow Hearts. Because one of the interesting things I find interesting is many people who made the Shadow Hearts series actually worked on this. That was something I didn't actually know at all. I did not know that at all. That was actually an interesting thing to learn while reading up about a few things that I wasn't aware of. That, but I feel like the game was in a troubled development. You gotta keep in mind, Mistwalker was a brand new company, and they had a small team. The people who technically developed this game, I think it was Feel Plus they were called. Let me get my little note here. Feel Plus was the main people who developed the gameplay aspects of Lost Odyssey, while Mistwalker would come up with, you know, the art direction, story, and ideas of the gameplay in that. They basically worked with someone to help develop their games in their early life. And I feel like it was a mixture problem between being a new studio, working with another studio, being a Microsoft exclusive, which I'm sure got them extra cash, because at the time Microsoft was actually trying to break into the Japanese market. So going between different parties, both Japanese and American, and I feel like there was a lot of trouble with this game. But in looking up some interviews, there clearly was trouble on how they developed this game. And to be honest, considering a lot of that, this game came out pretty good, honestly. It's not like it's terrible or anything, but I feel like the freedom of the Immortals makes the game too easy. Like, if you've played through Final Fantasy Tactics and unlocked many of the job classes, you probably would agree with me on how broken you can break Final Fantasy Tactics. I feel like you get a bit of that in this once you start getting your Immortals starting to learn many, many of the things. You start getting really powerful characters. Because you have your four mortals, and as long as the story isn't opposing them to split up in some way, why would you ever really not have your four immortals in your main party, which your party can be up to 5 people. So obviously you have a total of more party members than you can have in your party at an active time. And I feel like that puts a lot of mortals in a back slot where you're just kind of exchanging the mortal in your main party to teach everyone their skills. It's just kind of, I feel like it doesn't encourage a lot of switching out your party as much. Because I mean, why would you really? They can learn everything, so your 2 mages and 2 melee killers can become the best of their things, you know? And you can design like 1 mage to be a healer, 1 mage to be a tackle. You can design them to be a mismatch. You can do different things, and they'll just basically always be better than your mortals after late game. After mid game, your mortals should vastly be superior to your mortal characters, and they're just mainly trying to still learn any new things from the mortals. It feels like a mixed kind of feel to it between the disconnect, the story, because the mood of the main game story feels comical, might be a way to put it. Like, I mean, you got the weird romance with one of the mortal characters with an immortal character. And his voice acting, though funny, is kind of... though he does develop to be a slightly better character. It just... the game feels like it was supposed to be, like, envisioned as this really sad tale. And the main story feels more comical at... It kind of will probably vary from person to person, but I didn't hate the game. I don't certainly hate it. I can recommend it if you are a hardcore fan of the original Final Fantasy games. Or maybe a better way to say it, if you enjoyed Final Fantasy X in its era, maybe you should take a look at Lost Odyssey, because it's certainly not bad. It has flaws in it. Like I said, disconnect story between the 2 modes of game, the visual novel aspect and the main gameplay story feel kind of weird. Plus, there's a really important segment of story that's actually completely missable that explains a lot about the Immortals that you can literally miss. That is fucking weird to me. And we'll talk about that in spoilers, like I said. But honestly, I'd say if you didn't enjoy Final Fantasy X or that era of JRPGs, probably should pass Lost Odyssey. But if that generation of RPGs was interesting to you, if you never played Lost Odyssey, or you're interested in one of the people who was the brainchild of the majority of Final Fantasy titles, I would recommend checking out Lost Odyssey. Now, it's a little tricky. I'm not going to get straight into spoilers yet. I have to explain a few things before we get there. So first thing, this has never been physically ported to anything else. It is a physical 360 game only. Digitally, however, it is compatible with the Xbox One, and it is compatible with the Xbox Series X as well, apparently, according to the Microsoft Store. So that's a goodie. So you can play this game on modern consoles. And interestingly, at least with the Xbox One, I don't know how the Series X works with it, but on the Xbox One, you can just pop in Disc 1 and download the whole digital game, and it never needs any disc swapping. So if you got Xbox One, you can, and then you can find just Disc 1, you can just get the game free that way, basically. But when it comes to the digital marketplace, it's $24.99 on Xbox Live. if you want to get a physical disc, you're looking at upward to like $18 for a quibbed version of the game. Not super expensive. Now, if you're interested in that disc 1, as I said, which is the only thing you need if you want to download the digital version on your Xbox One, if you're not familiar with how compatible 360 games or compatible original Xbox games are on the Xbox One, how they work is you put the disc in and it checks that, and that's used as the kind of DRM check, and then it lets you download the digital version. The disc is not actually used to play the game on the Xbox One, which is why you only need disc 1 of the game to download and play it on your Xbox One, never needing disc 3, 2, 3, and 4, which is interestingly led me to the realization when I looked up the eBay prices of why there were so many disc 1, 2, and 3s being sold separately as replacement discs on eBay. There's tons of them. So many listings of them for like $2 to $8. And there's occasionally a few listings for like, here's one for disc 1 for $14.70. That so the disc thing is kind of a mess, honestly. And of course, that's not counting the fact that the DVD CDs are terrible condition a lot of times, in America at least. Maybe you're more lucky in the European territories and you used market, but Americans took care of their 360 games like they do their children. And by that, I mean very badly. Very badly. So, finding a good condition copy might be a little difficult, so you might want to consider some of those replacement discs, maybe. But they're all quibbed copies on eBay and Amazon and that. And they look like they mainly weigh between $18, $20 for a quibbed copy with all the discs and stuff. Some other technical things I would like to talk about, my experience with playing through the game. My 360 died playing this game. Now, my original 360 died on me when I played Phantasy Star Universe, and the replacement 360 of that, which was still the arcade white looking type one, the original model looking one, that replacement one lasted me until I got to, I think we were disc 3 of this, and that died on me. It gave me a red wing, and I was like, oh fuck. So I bought a spare 360 Dan had that sadly had trouble of its own after playing it a little while. We played it for a little while, and then it started having a weird disc issue where it would think the disc tray's opening and closing, but it's not, and I couldn't get that fixed. That was a later model, and then I got a, I think, what? I'm not familiar with 360 models. Another model was later. It has the touch inject button on it. Now, my experience trying Lost Odyssey and these two completely different models from my original model were all very different. In my original modeled 360, the game played fine, loaded, saved, and stuff. Now, when I went to the second Xbox, which was the black one, it still had the button eject button, but it wasn't designed the same way as the white arcade original model designed ones. It had a weird issue where the music would vanish at times, and it would take forever to load a save or save a save. And a lot of times the audio would cut out and you wouldn't have music. It was very weird. The same problem consisted onto the touch inject button model one I had, where it would have the longer saving and loading of your saves, and sometimes the audio for the music would go bye-bye. I don't know what causes it, considering two separate models did it. So I don't know if it was something between the 360s or if it was just something weird, honestly. To me, it tells me for some reason Lost Odyssey doesn't like newer 360s to me. But again, I don't have a bazillion 360s to kind of make that test. And sadly, upon trying to research about it, I've had no luck finding anyone that's had like topics or research on that. So you'll have to take it with a grain of salt. I feel like Lost Odyssey doesn't like newer 360 models. But I would definitely be interested on anyone else's experiences using Lost Odyssey on other 360 models. Now on the Xbox One, it runs very nice, sure load times and everything, you know, a little boost to the graphics. So that's probably the better way to play it, honestly, if you have Xbox One. But, you know, if you want the physical good, though. Now, the last thing I would like to talk about in a technical sense with this game is Disc 4. Now, I did not have this problem with my Disc 4, but this is what I did find when I was trying to look up about the weird issues on other 360 models that I was having with the game. This was the only thing I was getting when looking it up, was this weird problem with Disc 4. And my lord, we're not talking about just like 2 or 3 people. We're talking tons of people. So, apparently, to explain how this game was sold in America, the 3 discs were stacked on each other on a spindle in the middle of the case, while the 4th disc was inside a little paper thing with the booklet. Apparently, the material for the paper thing had something bad on it and rubbed off on the disc if you left it in there long term. And it made some weird coating that made the disc hard to read. And there were so many people that had this problem. And it's weird that a lot of people recommended boiling the disc to get the stuff off. And people claim that worked, but I can't recommend you boiling a plastic disc. I can't recommend that. Probably what would be a better idea would be to take it to a buffer and buff it, because it would take whatever would be on the surface off. But if you have this issue, I would advise researching it very carefully before you even consider boiling your disc that would bend in hot water. But I don't know. There was a lot of people with that problem. Luckily, I didn't have that problem because I immediately took it out and gave them all their own discs. Now, what I originally did is I just gave them each their own case. But when I started GameStop dumpster diving, I found these cases that were for like Call of Duty collections and shit that had these multi-disc holders. And I gave one of those to my copy. So now all 4 discs are in one case with their own little tray holder. It's very nice. Definitely recommend trying to find one of those if you still have the spindle case for it. Awful thing. Got one for my Blue Dragon too. Very nice thing. But just throwing that out there because legit there were shitloads of people that had that problem. So I guess on my end, at least I didn't have to suffer through that problem. But as far as I could tell, because the game ran fine on my original white modeled 360, so to me it just feels like there's something wrong with it in newer versions. But I don't know for sure. Like I said, maybe someone out there has 50 different 360 models and could do a bunch of testing or something, because I would be very interested to know why it ran weirdly on 2 360s that I got after that one died playing it. Poor thing. I miss it because it was a lot quieter too. Which is hard to say, really, since they're all fucking noisy. Anywho. So, back to the main thing now. I recommend this for people who liked some of the JRPGs of the PS2 era, like Final Fantasy X kind of esque. What kind of value would I give Lost Odyssey? Well, having to judge it as an older game, I would have to give it a probably $25 value, which pretty much lines it up with its Microsoft Store digital price. You get over 50 hours or even more because there is a lot of side content. There's super bosses and shit and stuff to go in and that. But admittedly, it's in the category where those are harder than the story final boss. So going into that stuff before the final boss makes the final boss even more ridiculously easy. So, but there is side stuff to do at the end of the game and stuff, so you definitely get a lot of extras. And there's also a new game plus mode too, if you wanted to re-experience the story. So there's that also, kinda but there's that also. And of course, being on Microsoft's consoles, you can get 1,000 achievement points if that's your kind of thing in the game. They're mostly going through the story, getting your characters developed nicely and stuff. You'll get a good chunk of it playing through the story, but a lot of them also link to a lot of side stuff. So if you want 100% it, it's going to be a bit of work. But I wouldn't say this was a bad game by any means, but I do feel like because of the disconnect between the two moods of the 1,000 story visual novel-esque part of the game and the main story, I just feel like there were certain elements that just make it feel more forgettable. Because, like, the music to me is the most memorable thing about the game. And while the art design is certainly not terrible, like I said, you don't see a lot of the drawing artwork. You just see a lot of 3D models of using that artwork. So I don't feel like the models in that really bestow a long-term memory. Honestly, I feel like this was, well, a lost tragedy, really. It's a fun game still. I do recommend it if you have a way to play it, if you want to get it digitally or physically. Like I said, I do not know if you can do the disc thing with the series like you can with Xbox One. Not sure. You might have to look about that. I couldn't find anything about that. You know, the series is still early. You know, it's only been around for, what, like a week or two, 3 weeks maybe. Hasn't been a month at least, because it was out in November and it's early December, so it might be almost a month, but I don't think it's been quite a month yet, so I don't have the answer about whether you can use a disc on series, but it does list the digital version as being playable on the series, so that was my thoughts on that. So let's get into spoilers, shall we? Because boy, we got some shit to talk about here. So, okay. Gengor is an immortal, you know, he made everyone forget so he can try and stay in this world to be immortal and shit. Now, Gengor, like, doing the whole Kefka thing isn't necessarily bad. Like, Kefka is a very beloved villain, but Gengor doesn't fucking do it for me, honestly, to me. Maybe for you, but not me. Like, he's, like, trying to be Kefka-ish, but he's, like, also, like, Discount Jafar. Discount Kefka and Discount Jafar merged together or something. I mean, hell, he legit kills somebody with a snake. That's just fucking weird. I mean, it's interesting seeing him, like, murder people in a political kind of background kind of way in the early parts of the game, but Gengor is just, like, a very cartoonish villain, especially in the end. Like, his laughter and everything is not memorable like Kefka is. Kefka was like like when you actually understand Kefka, he was a produced super weapon essentially. Like he's insane. Gorge just wants to fucking live forever and rule the world. Now the things you learn about the Immortals is they came from another world that apparently has no emotions. When they came to this world, they got to experience emotions, and that's kind of the weird plot of the main game outside the 1,000-year story, is that the emotions have been affecting them, and Gagor is basically high on greed and power kind of emotions, and wants to rule the world, stay here to be immortal, and he wants to destroy the gate that led them to coming over here. Now, they came over here because something was affecting their world, which you find out was the emotions. Now, all this kind of shit is plot dumped on you in an underground facility under Gagor's house that's completely optional. If I had not gone there, I would have been confused at fuck what the hell was going on. I don't know why that was a side thing. It's very odd choice on that. Very odd choice on that. I don't know why that was a side thing at all. But when it comes to Gagor as a final boss and stuff, oh, the final boss was very disappointing, honestly. It is not actually hard. I did die to Gagor, but not because any failings on fighting him, but because he did what I didn't expect most final bosses to do. Do basically instant kill everyone in one move, and not because of damage, but because of petrification. Now, to be fair to Gagor, some final bosses have terrorizing instant kill moves and things. Hell, look at Persona 3's final boss. It could charm someone, make them heal it for its max HP, and fucking ruin that entire phase of the boss fight. So, I mean, there are some bosses that can use stat effects to damning results, but the thing is, Gagor uses the Petrify spell on everyone. So it's just an instant death if you don't have immunity to petrification up on at least one person. So, normally, you know, a boss that does stuff like that would affect one or half the party, and not usually everyone. So, that kinda wasn't expected, but, you know, after slapping petrification immune, it was just pretty much whittle them down. It's a multi-phase thing, but none of them's really hard at all. It's just whittle it down, whittle it down. So, very disappointing final boss. Now, like I said, there are several super bosses that I looked up, and they definitely put up a bigger challenge if you're looking for somebody that gives you a good challenge for your characters. So, they're out there if that's your cup of tea, but yeah. Gagor wasn't a satisfying villain. His appearances throughout the game are like, besides the final battle, every battle you have with him is pointless because it's just a story battle that you're meant to lose. It's just, Gagor is not a very motivating villain for the story, and I feel like him and the general guy from Ming's country are like very awful villains. Like, not awful because they're good at being villains, but I mean, just they're awful at being villains. The voice actors are very corny, especially the general guy. But Gagor goes full-blown fucking slap happy ridiculous, like laughing at the end of the game. He just oh lord. I'd say they're probably the worst voice actors because, you know, everyone else is at least trying to be like serious, and these two clowns are like, ah! Oh, Lord. Honestly, I feel like if Gingora was actually replaced with a more competent, more successful, and maybe not such a fucking obvious villain, maybe it would have helped the story actually stand out more than it did. Because a story, you know, a lot of times a story is only as good as its villain and main plot. And, well, if the villain's a piece of shit, then the plot's going to have a lot to carry on. And like I said, I don't want to be like openly negative about Lost Odyssey, because there is enjoyment though, and you can definitely tell there are nods to older Final Fantasy games like 9, 10, and a few other elements in story beats and JRPG themes. It's definitely trying to cater to that fan base, but it's just a shame that didn't stand out for it. And tried to stand for it, but in the end, it didn't stand out towards people for those things. And it will just probably be lost to time for most people. It definitely has its fans, by all means. There's definitely people who love this entry and still want a sequel to this game, but it's probably no real hopes for it. Mistwalkers basically makes mobile games at this point, so who knows if Mistwalker will ever even make any actual games outside mobile garbage. It feels like Mistwalker sadly just never found its footing over the years that made its games, so it's a shame, but that is the reality we live in. So those are my thoughts on Lost Odyssey. I'm sorry it was a pretty long video than normal. You know, usually I don't go too over 30 minutes too often, but I feel like there was a lot of things to talk about. I wanted to talk a little about the development, some of the people who worked on the game, because it was interesting to learn people who made Shadow Hearts were some of the people who worked on this. And I didn't really know about the best-selling author guy either. I was aware an author worked on the 1,000-Year Stories, but I wasn't aware he was the best-selling author, at least at that time. I'm not sure about right now. Best-selling author in Japan, FYI, just make sure it's clear. Also, interestingly enough, there's a very famous translator who worked on translating those stories, by the way. And interestingly enough, he is very, very anti-violence. Like, he hates video games, basically, because, you know, there's, well, sadly, lots of violence in a lot of games, because conflicts is usually a very easy way to design a game around. Sad, true. But apparently, like, the story was, like, the idea of being anti-war and stuff, and that was so moving to him, he actually wanted to accept the job to translate them properly. So that's actually an interesting extra little footnote there. But yeah, those are my thoughts. So getting inside was a bit long. But anyway, if you feel like you learned anything interesting, please feel free to leave a like. Feel free to leave a comment down below or message me on Twitch if you have any questions about anything, especially some of those technical things. And feel like you learned nothing at all, feel free to leave a dislike. Feel free. And until next time, I'll see you out there in the proving grounds.